I was at this point where the New Zealand business had gone under and I was getting sued, and that litigation went hot. The Australian business went completely under, and I lost every cent I had. By the time I actually had launched AG, I was bankrupt. I'd been litigated. I'd faced depression. I was struggling a lot. And I went back, and this is literally when I sat down and I really started to think hard on happiness. Happiness to me is one, the second isn't, and the third, just take fucking action. Just one thing, like right now. Not 10 things, not 20 things, one thing today, right now. That's all. You have one life. We have one life. It's not a practice life. So make it your one spectacular life.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Growth Essentials. I'm super excited for this one as well, because today I brought on Chris. And Chris, as you just heard, has a crazy story behind him. But over and over again, throughout his life journey, he managed to take ownership over his own life and his own situation, to always make sure that he can actually create a life that he loves to live. And that's exactly what he will teach you about today. How you can take ownership over your own life and actually create one you love and live in happiness at the same time. So I would say, let's get started. I'm Alina, and this is Growth Essentials, the podcast for your best self on things you wished you learned in school. Chris, super nice to see you today with me. Totally appreciate it. You were born and raised in New Zealand, I believe. So if you had to take us back to your early days and your childhood, what do you think we would need to know about you to better understand the person that you have become today?
Alina, thank you for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here, and huge kudos to you for your ability to outreach, get my attention, get me engaged, and get me on your show. You did an amazing job, and I think there's so much that your audience can learn from you about how to be a human who is amazing at connecting with and touching other humans. And you did great, and I'm very happy to be here. So I was born to two very intrepid parents. My parents come from tiny little towns, 3,000 and 5,000 population. Met my father, then basically went and lived in Japan. My mother eventually joined him. By the time I was 13, I'd been to 43 or 44 countries. I think I'd lived in 4 or 5, and it wasn't sort of your regular Kiwi upbringing. And I learned a lot with that exposure from my parents. I hit the lottery with my parents. I'm grateful every day for just how amazing my mother and father are, and just how supportive they've always been. And they were determined to give us experiences. And I think this is a gift that maybe your audience is early in thinking about having kids one day, but when they do have kids, embrace the idea of giving experiences and sharing experiences as part of the human journey, and also what it gives your children. Because what it gave us was the ability to make friends, and learning that when you're put into a foreign culture, particularly where you don't even speak the language, maybe you know no one, you have to learn how to reach out and touch another human. And I think while that someone can get a lot of brownie points in their own mind being too cool for school in their local nightclub, it doesn't help you at all when you step out of your local area of comfort. And in fact, I think one of the rarest things, most important things, most special things, is the ability to reach out and connect with and touch another human being with warmth and sort of that sense of I am interested in you and would like to be your friend. So we all learnt that very young, very early, and got to practice it a lot because we moved around a lot. And we also learnt that we're citizens of the world, like we're global citizens. We come from a country. I'm very proud of my country. I follow the All Blacks. I'm proud to be a Kiwi. But I also realize we're just a tiny part of this beautiful whole that is the planet. And so we think large, we think globally. So those were advantages and experiences that I'm very grateful for. And also, I had parents who always said to each of us, look, inside your genetic limitations, because I wasn't going to be dunking a basketball on top of Michael Jordan or winning a 100-meter race. You can be anything you want to be if you're willing to put in the work. And we took that to heart, And I think that that degree of supportiveness is huge. So my journey really starts with parents who were willing to take us places where they were out of their comfort zone with us, with them, to have experiences that just led us, I think, to be humans who are better able to connect with other humans and willing to think of ourselves as the owners of our own destiny and having that encouragement. And I think if you look at some of these different areas of where some people grow up in certain environments with a certain degree of talent and have certain opportunities, and where others might have the same talent and even the same natural propensity, but end up doing very different things. And there are huge elements of your natural talent, your experience, your natural predisposition, and then obviously your environment. And as part of that environment, I believe it's huge, because who you surround yourself with and what their beliefs are is huge, because it can help you set your eyes further out towards the horizon. And then also having a belief structure. So frequently you talk to someone, and there are a lot of people who didn't have this and have a chip on their shoulder and still do great things. But in most cases, it was someone believed in me, made me feel that I could do it, helped encourage me to put in the work even when that was hard, and that sort of belief in me that led me to have the confidence to keep taking steps forward. And in other cases, people literally come from stories of incredible hardship with no support structure and just set their mind on taking another step forward each and every day and end up to do amazing things. So I think your early question was, how was my life in New Zealand and what were some of the pieces that impacted on my life journey? And I think my parents and that family sort of, and then the travel environment were the main ones.
Thank you for sharing a bit of your personal story. Is that something you still practice to this day, to bring yourself, so to say, in new environments and challenge you over and over again to meet new people, to meet also maybe, yeah, like completely different people from the way they were brought up or in which environment they are right now?
It's always fun to meet new, interesting people, and every human has some story to tell. And I like meeting humans. So if you kind of think, what are the things that give me the most energy? Meeting an amazing new human, being able to connect with them, and in some format being able to give them some joy or some energy. Those are the things that most energize me on the planet. So um, those are not sort of challenges per se. When you're young and you're a kid and you're moving school and you desperately want to fit in, they are challenges because you really want to fit in. And I lived in Japan for nearly 7 years. I developed North American accent by the time I finished my schooling there. Went back to New Zealand, got beaten up my first day for being an outsider. Bunch of guys held me down, just punched and kicked me for being someone different. And I was sitting there going, I'm from New Zealand, I'm from New Zealand. And so I lost my accent in like 2 days flat. And I think my little sister lost hers even faster and got a Kiwi accent again. Now I try to hold on to my Kiwi accent, but I think some of those experiences do just highlight the importance. At some point, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone, but when you are comfortable inside those new engagements, you're not really outside your comfort zone. You're just very happy to play in that area. And then, of course, the challenge is how to continue to push and step forth beyond your comfort zone, because as I'm sure you're aware, all personal growth, in fact, all growth ultimately happens outside your comfort zone, which is why I literally think courage is probably the most underrated, underappreciated, undervalued, and underspoken about attribute when it comes to entrepreneurship.
What's your advice to people where it does not come natural to them? Let's say they're very introverted and just have a hard time meeting new people, going outside their comfort zone, and where it just does not really have that like natural, yeah, spirit for them, so to say.
Well, I think there's a couple of different pieces. This is a very good question. So, for most of us born in the modern Western world, we don't suffer. Our problems, I was in 3 red traffic lights in a row and my phone's out of battery, aren't actually problems, right? So, I think that there's a dynamic of us not appreciating just how spectacular the lives we have are, and also the commitments and suffering many generations went forward to us to have these freedoms and this quality of life, and being grateful for that. And I do think, however, if you start to sit down and look at it and go, all right, what are we talking about? We're talking about people taking action towards their dreams. We're talking people taking action towards something that they believe will give them a happier, more fulfilling, or better life. And there's a couple of different layers. The first is framing, and different people operate on different setups. So one is just simply saying what's the worst that can happen. The other is sitting there and applying a why. And I like the why application, which is basically trying to identify within you what it is that you're most likely either most afraid of or most excited by, and align that with what it is that you're trying to do. In most cases, it's the search of pleasure or the avoidance of pain. In nearly every case, if you just keep pushing deeper and deeper, it's some avoidance of pain. So, for example, mine is I do not want to lie on my deathbed looking back with a lot of regret. I think it'll be the deepest, most poignant, like horrendous disappointment that you can possibly have. There's nothing you can do at that stage to change much, if anything. And it's a pain that is very, very deep. So I choose to live my life with no regrets. And I don't want to lie there and say, if only I had, if only I had, if only I had. So my framing, when I thought about this earlier in my life around my why, was saying, I don't want to have regrets. I want to have said, I stepped boldly. I want to have said, I lived a health that was vibrant and I helped a lot of people, or I grew and I experienced these amazing things. Whatever, your certain buttons are at any given point in your own life journey and development. And I think the framing around the why is huge, because so often I've coached so many entrepreneurs over the years, and only after they're already taking action, frankly. And eventually we hit bumps in the road. Sometimes those bumps are significant, and sometimes those bumps are glass, what I call a glass wall, which means it's only a wall in your head. And sometimes they're real, legitimate, brutal brick walls that you've just run into at 100 miles an hour. And in each of those cases, it's very common for someone to enter a little bit of frustration and despair. And generally they'll come back and they'll say something like, look, I've tried all these things, none of it's working, I can't see what's going to get out of this, and it's just going to fail. And if you push and talk a little bit, you'll pretty quickly find there's a realistic dynamic of there being other things that they haven't tried yet because they're afraid of them. And the way to surmount that is a reframing on the why. And there are layers on this. For older people, it's like you want to turn up and be the best person you can for yourself and your family. For others, and this is my last lever, I leave this one to the very end, is we say, let's just imagine someone that you really love and care about is not well, and that person is gonna be the worst thing ever, but something horrible is going to happen to them unless you can do this by that date. And you can literally see people's their physiology change. You'll see this determination in their own heads of I'm going to go and do it. And you get a list normally within a day of like 10 things that they can and should try, and they've almost always taken action on the first one. And yet nothing has changed. There is not one single thing in their environment that's changed. There's not one single element of the circumstance that's changed. All that changed was the story they were telling themselves, which is the framing. So that's framing, right? The second piece is action. And that literally is just take fucking action. Just one thing, like right now. Not 10 things, not 20 things, not my great leap forward in 2 years' time. I'm going to go, no, one thing today, right now. That's all. And I think for most people, this idea of what are your 2 keys to success? Just fucking start, keep going. That's it. That's it in 2 lines. And I'm sure you agree, because you've tried things and they don't always work, and you learn.
Totally.
And the third is a dynamic of, depending on where you are in your journey, either harsh accountability or huge support and accountability. And there are all sorts of psychological dynamics of people to step out of their comfort zone when faced with a peer dynamic of having to turn up in front of their peers and report what they did or didn't do after they've committed to it. Because at the end of the day, we all want to be loved, we all want to belong, we all want to feel like we're valued and driving value for our tribe. And there's also the dynamic of some people just need a little bit more support, and they want to go away and talk about a lot of the pieces around sort of where they're afraid and why, and and just hear other people's stories so they can relate as part of that accountability. But the accountability has to be there whichever way you go. Some do best with just the stick. Some do best with all sorts of warm fuzzy carrots and a stick on the accountability piece. But for most of us entrepreneurs, the prize and the why is is easily big enough to be the carrot of itself. So you don't really need it. It's more about the support network. You can do it. Let's do it. Let's go. And then committing to something with a group of peers or even just an accountability partner, and then turning up and having to say, I did it or I didn't. And if I didn't, here's why.
I love that. I also know that you have been an athlete, right, in a part of your life. What do you think has that time taught you for your journey later on?
Well, I was never a great athlete. I was a good athlete who wasn't particularly consistent. So I had good days and bad days. And if I could have strung a lot of good days together, I might have had a more interesting journey. But I think the dynamic of any athlete, whatever you are in any kind of level, when you take it seriously, and I did take it seriously even though I wasn't particularly talented, is you understand that you have to at some certain point love the process, because you are going to be in the process for a significant period of time, and it is the inputs that you do consistently that lead to winning on game day. And there are a lot of varied inputs. You can't, the higher level athlete you are, the more of those inputs you have to get right. The older you are, if you want to maintain performance, the more of those inputs you have to get right. And I think for a lot of people who come from a team sport background, which I also had, you also learn about the importance of working with a team. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities my parents gave me to play a lot of different sport growing up, and wish, in fact, that I'd had more of my 20s playing more sport and less focused on building businesses and more focused on playing sport. So it's an interesting question.
That's very interesting because I also know that so before you finished high school, so you, not high school, but university, you left, right, to start indeed your first business, which has, after some time, not gone well and failed. So my question to you, I mean, that's however you want to define failure, first of all, right? But my question to you is, what has this experience then like done to you, so to say? And did you then ever regret of not finishing university and living a more, like student normal life, playing sports?
Well, so my first year of university, I basically just played sport and kind of partied. I had my first real girlfriend, and there wasn't a huge amount of study. The later years of university, when I realized, hey, this is an opportunity, I took it a bit more seriously. But when I started that company, and I didn't take ownership or responsibility for all the things that went wrong with that business, Alina. I blamed the two people I'd partnered with as being guys that didn't do what they say they were going to do, and I blamed kind of everything apart from taking responsibility myself. So the biggest lesson I learned from that particular business, which, depending how you think about it, it was my first proper business, right? And I tried some things as a 9-year-old. I've always been quite entrepreneurial, but that's a story for another day maybe. But it was my first proper business, and it didn't work, and I felt sorry for myself, and I didn't take ownership and responsibility for all those things. So the learning that I could have had from that experience, I delayed and delayed and delayed and disempowered myself from the learnings. And I tried a lot of different jobs. I got a lot of sales jobs, which basically actually I kind of don't always regret, because selling is an amazing skill to learn. I did a lot of very different things. After a couple of years of moping around, feeling a bit sorry for myself, a guy I'd done a lot of boxing and martial arts with, who's about 30 years older than me, said, look, man, I know you have some debts to pay off. I know you're sort of bouncing around from job to job. Have you ever thought about doing something for a while and maybe doing some service back to the community? How about being a policeman? And I hadn't thought about being a policeman, but I thought about it and went, yeah, fuck it. I could be a policeman. So I became a policeman for not quite 3 years. And a police is not exactly the world's most entrepreneurial institution. The New Zealand police is a very corruption-free, very, very much high public support institution. But it wasn't the most like, how can we do this better? How can we do this better? Get up and go dynamic. And It was actually while I was in the police, I started to get the itch. It really started to build inside me that I just wasn't really living true to my own calling. I wasn't investing my time on things that I believed either mattered to me in the process or had an outcome that I was after. So it had neither of the two boxes you ultimately want to tick. And so I started reading books again on, hey, how can I go make money? How can I have a business? What can I do? And I'd read all the Rich Dads, Poor Dads, and nearly every book you can imagine many years earlier. They hadn't really spoken to me. And I think, and this is one big difference for your amazing listeners now to when I was there, it's this access to the how to. So it's like, I know I want to do it. I know I'm capable. I've already proven I can take an action and I'll take more action. But how? Like, what is my how? How do I do this? How could I take a first step? And this now it's the opposite. Now there's so much information on the internet, some of it free, some of it not. You just don't know what to believe. But there's definitely a lot of access to how to in 1,000 different ways, if not 10,000 different ways, someone can pursue an entrepreneurial journey. So the first lesson you asked, the big lesson, I didn't actually take the lesson for many years afterwards, and I promise I'll get to that in a second. When I eventually started to decide I wanted to take action again, uh, the books that made sense to me were actually real estate books. And I like houses, I like real estate, but it's not my deeper calling. It's also an area where humans are always going to need a place to sleep. And so it's an industry where as long as there's net migration and net population growth, there's an industry. And I started figuring out like, okay, you can take an ugly house and make it pretty, and if the cost to make it pretty are less than the value that you increase the house by, and you then sell the house, you have a business. And so that became my business. And it wasn't actually until I was exposed to my second great mentor, my first sort of formal mentor, because my parents, especially my dad, were my first early mentors, most supportive humans ever. But my dad was always one to kind of encourage us to try to think our way through problems towards what it was that we wanted. And I went into this room. It's a guy called Keith Cunningham. He's a phenomenal teacher of finances. He's a bit older now, but back then he was doing these mentoring programs with 25 people in a room. And I went into this room thinking I'm going to talk about how to raise money for my startup and so I can 5x it or whatever. Instead, he listened to me talk for about an hour, and there must have been a few things in my speaking that he picked up on, and he's a very, very good listener. And most people will tell you most things. You can kind of catch both their words and their physiological dynamics of when they speak. And let's just say this. First, he made me cry in front of that room full of people by reading me a poem basically about how it's okay to be good, it's okay to be great, and you were born to shine. And Nelson Mandela read this at his inauguration speech, but it's actually, I forgot her name, Marianne Williams, I think, is the original author of this. And it's just stand up, step into the shoes that you're capable of filling. Then he made me sit down and take full ownership of every single thing that had failed in that business. And I had a homework task. I had to write down 50 things that I should have or could have done differently. Full responsibility, 100% on me. No laying blame or justifying with anyone else. And it was a life-changing experience. Those two pieces in conjunction. One was just that step up, self-belief. Stop pulling yourself down because you think it helps those around you. It doesn't. It's the opposite. It's when you truly step into your own real power as a human that you really inspire others to step up and do the same. And that's something that's a challenge sometimes in New Zealand because culturally there's this dynamic called tall poppy, which I don't think serves anyone, frankly. So there was that, and then there was the ownership dynamic. And I sat there and looked at this page when I finished that course, and I dotted the page 50 times because he's like, yeah, that's the way to get your brain flowing. And I sat at it for 2 hours and nothing. And then I started writing, and I ended up writing 76 different things that I could have or should have done better. And I went from feeling like I had been the victim of a poor business experience to having all the power in the world because I'd taken ownership of each and every lesson I humanly could. And those two things just took my trajectory from like this to like that. and I think I was a millionaire about 6 months later. But not that that was sort of the main goal, it was just a milestone I'd set myself. So the understanding of how you can take the lessons has to be tied with a sense of ownership. Like, it is you. And if you're a founder, CEO, executive, anyone in this dynamic, it is on you. There is no one else. It is you. So own it. Just like own your health. All of it's the same. Own the great relationship. Want to have more time with your parents? They aren't always there. You can flip that. Start taking ownership. Take them out to dinner. Take them away for holidays. You can do all sorts of interesting things. So those are my big pieces. One, take ownership. And then two, take action more boldly into what you're truly capable of.
You just said something interesting, that also that financial goal was just like a side goal for you, but never the main thing for you to achieve. What was your goal in that time then? Like, what was your what did you like initially think of this to become, you know?
So originally my thinking was to have financial freedom. I wanted the freedom to choose how to invest my time. And the why there was, I had a dad who worked so much to try to give us the security and the experiences and everything else. And I didn't see him. He worked from home actually most of my life. But like Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m., we'd see him at dinner. He'd work till like 1, like day in, day out. And so I was determined that, I've had this chat with him, that I was grateful for everything he'd done, but I would have rather had more time with my dad than anything else. And we had a big cry. It was good. It was a good moment. But the piece here, I think, was just thinking on financial freedom that gave me that, so I could choose to have the freedom to how I want to invest my time. And I also thought then, because I love business, I love the game of business, I love the whole process of building businesses and helping people and adding value. It's cool, it's fun, and it's a challenge. And I thought at that time, I want to build an empire around this. And it was just a milestone, basically, towards that. It wasn't the end goal. I wasn't like, I'll be happy when. That didn't apply. It was just a milestone.
So afterwards, it changed a bit again, right? So there was a tough time coming in life at you afterwards, right? That was like after that real estate company went south again, I think. You tell me that story in a second. But you were then like describing your time afterwards being a lot darker, a bit depressed even, I believe, and then also financially again, I think in like $5 million in debt and sleeping on a friend's couch in New York.
Happy memories. So Lena, my passion wasn't really in the business I was building, and when I got a little bit further down the journey at that time, and I took off and went traveling for about 8 or 9 months, and it was actually in that journey that I realized I want to play rugby again, and I didn't want to go back to New Zealand because I felt like I was going backwards, and I went to Australia, and I ended up facing. I started another business there. I'm very used to the world back then of property and how do you finance doing up a house and a lot of those pieces. I kept dealing with health and nutrition and studying, and I'd have a few different personal training clients, and I thought I knew a lot about health and nutrition, and that would become relevant in a little bit later. And that was where my real passion was, frankly. It's like helping people with health and living a spectacular life is what really lights me up. But I ended up facing, all at the same time, first litigation in the New Zealand business, which ended up sort of getting shut down and disappearing. Then the global financial crisis hit, and I do take responsibility that in all my modeling and everything else I'd been thinking through, I thought about a lot of things, but I hadn't accounted for the thought that half the lenders in my industry might go out of business in a 6 to 8 week period. And boo-hoo, I have to take responsibility for it. But what happened is, when those two businesses ultimately ended up collapsing, and that didn't happen for a while, it wasn't an overnight process. I was already going through a process where my health had really tanked, and I was getting sick 4 or 5 times a year at least of pretty severe upper respiratory tract infections. I was feeling no energy. I was going to the toilet sometimes 15, 20 times a day with weird kind of bloating, and I just felt miserable. And eventually, I went, bugger this. I'm going to go get all the testing I can because most of the doctors in New Zealand and Australia couldn't really help me much. And at least at that time, it's changed a lot now. And I ended up at a clinic in the US where I ended up investing a ton of money on every blood stool saliva test you can possibly imagine. It was like 52 vials of blood came out of my arm. It was they're only like five mils a. They're not a lot of blood in each of those vials, but I didn't know that then. I was like, holy shit. But anyway, did every test you can imagine. I found out my body wasn't absorbing nutrients properly, and my gut was insanely inflamed. I had Epstein-Barr, which is like a common cause of chronic fatigue, that was off the charts, the highest I'd ever tested. And they're like, yeah, man, you don't absorb nutrients properly, and there's a few bits and pieces going on. Actually, very early they thought I might have cancer, but we quickly ruled that out. And that became the beginning of another journey. Um, and it was a journey towards my sort of having my own health back. And that was the first half of it, which was basically I came out of that, and these guys were great. They were nice to me, and they gave me a customized to my blood biochemistry $100 a day supplement diet regime. It was like 50 pills. And I tried that for a few months, but I came out of that sort of whole experience with them with two very clear things in my brain because I thought I knew, remember, a ton about training, a ton about nutrition, and I thought I was pretty smart about all this stuff, yet I'd gotten so sick. And I came out of that realizing most of what we think about nutrition is wrong. It really is. And this is back then. Everyone was missing the gut health and the nutrient absorption layer. Everyone was just so far off. Um, and I think there had to be a better way. So I began this process of considering my own health journey at the same time as those other businesses just disintegrated. And uh, it was interesting. Luckily, I got over my own health dynamic just before everything literally just exploded. And then I went through a process of thinking, how could I take, because by then I was tinkering and playing with all these different things and speaking to a lot of experts, like how could I sit there and say, well, I'm going to rebuild my life. I'm facing very imminent financial ruin, and I knew that there was a litigation thing coming that I didn't really see myself having the dollars to be able to fight in any way. And I want to build my life forward around the things that I am truly passionate about and truly believe in. And working with some of the smartest naturopaths, amazing clinical researcher, amazing doc, put together sort of a huge, nutrient dense, extremely high quality formulation. Because the other thing I like is I like simplicity. I like very simple, very efficacious, very powerful things. And so, Alina, like the beginnings of that new business were born. And I sometimes crack up because I managed to get the money together to do that, get the research together to get the first of the Athletic Greens pieces together. I then named this business completely the wrong thing, Athletic Greens, because in the North American market, greens are largely powdered grasses. They're very cheap ingredients, and it was a category that wasn't the smartest marketing move that I made. So I don't normally recommend people just go, yeah, I've got this, pour money into production until they've actually gone and tried things with customers a bit more first. I had early people try the product and say, this shit is amazing, I love it. So I knew that I was onto something. But I landed that in the US. I raised a bit of money. I very quickly went through the spare bit of that money, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the market. Then I was at this point where the New Zealand business had gone under and I was getting sued, and that litigation went hot. The Australian business went completely under, and I lost every cent I had. I went from being a young guy worth a few $1 million, nothing crazy, to negative $1 million very quickly. I'd never done anything financially with my parents prior to some of that real estate financing stuff because we sort of just done our own thing with money. But my dad had retired and didn't have any cash flow, so I'd suggested he invest with me, and it worked for a while. Then that money disappeared. My parents ended up having to lose their house. They'd lost their life savings and their house. That was on me. Then litigation hit, and so there aren't that many people with my name. So I'm a very good guy. I've always very proud of how I stood and looked after our customers. I had some naivety about taking something that I'd seen work in the US and tried in New Zealand, and I ended up getting. I faced the music for that, and then my parents, who were going through not a very comfortable situation, were looking at me, and I was very unhappy that I felt that I'd let them down so much. And all they said to me was, "We love you, we support you, we know this is a hard time for you. We're sure you're going to be okay. Like we believe in you." And when I was launching, this was all by then I was in the US, and so by the time I actually had launched AG, I was bankrupt. I'd been litigated. I'd faced depression. Yeah, even when you're in the moments of deepest despair and deepest depression and really concerned you've let down those that love you the most. Some of the things I'm most proud about is I made decisions towards a long-term value, and it was the long-term, the value I could add, the difference I could make in the world. And I'm very proud of, even in those worst moments, making the best long-term decisions. And I also, was dealt a lot of grief and a lot of depression, particularly of what I put my parents through. And I'm kind of past that now. And they've even said to me, "Look, you used that; it served you. It put a serious rocket under you. But now, we're happy." Paid everyone their money back with interest, by the way. Took me 10 years. And then, it's a different life now. So uh, life's quite interesting because, yeah, I literally had moments where I'd lived through my rent deposit. I was many, many millions in debt, numbers that were multiples over what my net worth had ever been, and trying to get a startup off the ground. So starting from zero is easy. My 2 cents.
Wow. Yeah, like I think if you're listening to that, some people will be speechless, right? I mean, that sounds like a tough story, and yet I admire it so much how you still had that courage to go after that new business again and build something off the like from scratch again, and that's so amazing to me. What do you think? Because you described it, right, you knew that, or you felt like you let your family down, the people that invested you and so on. So what was, like, where did that courage from you inside came to say, okay, I'm going to follow this new thing and I'm going to build Athletic Greens from scratch now?
So it's a good question. So I had a very big why, right? I had let down the people who loved me the most, and I was determined to do right by them. I was also in a pretty deep hole, and when you're in a deep hole, it pays to work pretty hard to get out of the hole. And my sisters were very loving and very kind, and I'd turned up in the UK to go to like a food expo, and it was just before I literally completely ran out of all cash, and it was literally a month or two before the absolute low point of the financial setup. And they're the ones who said you need to do something about the happiness. So if you think about, I had a health dynamic, then I had this business absolute craziness, then I sort of had an absolute low point financially, and I had my own depression that I was sitting there thinking with. And I'm very like when they said that to me, it was a real wake up call to me, and because I wasn't particularly productive and I was struggling a lot. And I went back, and this is literally when I sat down and I really started to think hard on happiness. And happiness to me is one, you have to have your health, like you really do. There are some people who aren't healthy, who maintain happiness. Some chronically sick people, but they kind of are layering in this other area of how, like, they're doing everything else right other than those pieces. But I think for 99 point some percent population, health. The second is invest in the key relationships. These are the ones that ultimately mean the most to you. I don't think anyone on any tombstone ever has said he built XYZ company or she built this brand, or no one gives a shit, right? It's really just how did you interact and touch the humans around you. So invest your time in those key relationships, and then invest your time with purpose and meaning. And the purpose and meaning could mean many different things depending on where you're on the life journey. And I think if you're early in your life journey, it is very important that you embrace an approach of where there is a learning experience to be had that will help drive you towards the outcome you ultimately want. Be willing to go through the pain of going through that experience. And that's something I think is missing a lot in this generation. There's some bonuses in this generation. Like people aren't willing to sit there miserable on a life journey that they don't believe in. I think that's a good thing. But the flip side is people are hitting friction and quitting really fast. And if you take our grandparents' generation, they hit friction and man did they keep going. But they also tended to sit on life paths that weren't particularly rewarding for them in the bigger scheme of things. So there's lessons to be learned from both, but one of the biggest bits of encouragement I can have for people is like if there's an outcome you're aiming for or you're trying to learn some element of the process, is to be willing to go through the friction and the pain and the hard stuff to get there. And when I had this whole experience happening, I was living in Miami. I had run out of my rent. I had a 3 month security deposit, and so I lived through my security deposit. I had a call every day from the real estate agent going, "How dare you? How can you do this to me? I hate you. You need to get out." And I'd be, I'll leave the day. I'll leave in 90 days. I'd gone right through my cash. I had already had the experience of embracing the happiness. So, and at that stage, I was already into trying to own both the physiological and the psychosocial and sort of my own inputs dynamic to happiness. And so, what does that mean? Um, I'd realized that there were some other tiny sort of business pieces that I had in my life that were not making me happy, and I dropped them all. And I realized that there are certain friends that I was hanging out with, and hanging with them was neither a positive environment nor did it make me happy, and I dropped them all. And that is not easy for a lot of people to do. And I did that, and I stopped drinking because I'd been hitting the bottle way too hard. I took ownership of the daily exercise, the sun on my face, an early morning walk, getting into hot and cold, so going into the sea, getting quite cold, coming out, getting warm, doing the same. I didn't have a sauna, but doing the same hot and cold shower. And those things will actually trigger a dynamic that can lead you to feel more awake, alert, and happy. So can the bright light on your face in the morning. I'm sure you've noticed when because you're in Berlin, right? I'm sure you've noticed during winter, series of dark days, it's just a little bit more of a hill to climb. Then sun's out, birds are tweeting, warm sun on your face, and be aware of those inputs. And then the psychosocial side, I had at least one or two dinners with positive friends every week, and I took up salsa dancing. And so 3 nights a week, I went to this little Cuban place and tried to learn to dance salsa. That was pretty cool. And so I did all of those things. I hacked away everything that wasn't serving where I wanted to go and the person I wanted to be, and that included the humans that I was with. I focused on the daily health inputs that were in my control: exercise, sun exposure, big long walk in the morning. I then went for the psychosocial pieces, and then for the work, and this one is so huge. So I've got a startup, as one employee, I owe nearly $5 million in debt. I have no money, I'm bankrupt, I'm literally living through my security deposit, and I have this to-do list like that. And so all I did is I said to myself, every day is a success if you do one thing towards the business. Just one. You're only allowed one thing on your to-do list every day. And this is something I encourage people to think of as well, because it ties back to strategy. You actually want to focus your time as a founder or executive or entrepreneur on those few things that actually lead to winning, and avoid all the noise, the busy stuff that can get around it. So it forced me to narrow my focus on the things I had to do, which ended up, was one thing. I had two results I had to build, and I built one, and then I built the other. And and that's literally all I did for that entire period of time. And so I was lucky enough that when the worst of the financial things bit, I was through a lot of that emotional dynamic of my own depression, still faced with guilt, still faced with the angst and the horror, and I was in a very clean pattern of how I was living my life, and the action I was taking every day was that one thing, one thing, one thing, one thing. So when I finished that security deposit, a friend shouted me to fly to New York, and then I got bounced around friends' couches for a couple of months, between New York and Philadelphia. So yeah, it was an interesting journey, Alina. But I think owning the physiological, the psychosocial dynamics to your own happiness is so important, and every single human can choose to do that. And then owning the elements of how you choose to say, I succeeded today or not, and focusing on that one thing, everyone can do that as well.
Absolutely agree. I think this is something that comes or would come counterintuitive for a lot of people, though, right? Because especially if you go through change, if you want to um, build something from scratch, you all oftentimes get like in this mind of there are 100 things to do. I don't know where to start, and you get extremely overwhelmed, and you start deprioritizing everything else you just told me about, right? Every part that fits that fits into your own happiness. Usually for a lot of people, right, they reject it in those times. Happened to me also before.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I'm sure there's a personal experience story here.
Definitely. That's why I feel like, you always need to remind yourself how important those other things of happiness are, also in terms of then being able to succeed in that one thing you set up for yourself, right? Because you're prioritizing yourself. But how do you think, like, what was your experience in that time? How did you, let's say, trick your mind over and over again that you were able to prioritize yourself and your own happiness, and then make sure you achieved one thing, but you did not get overwhelmed so much in terms of, okay, there's still a million other things that I need to get done?
So this is a very good question. So if you think about all the different inputs around health and some of these areas, it's focusing on the few things that really matter and having a low bar for making sure you've done the input every day, because otherwise you have it drop. It's the simple inputs that have the biggest ROI and then a low bar on your own story of success. This isn't the impact to my customer. That's a very different thing. That's the highest bar you can humanly imagine. It's more like the story I'm telling myself, right? Because if you say, oh, exercise is a waste of time unless I get 60 minutes, and you're like, I've only got 20 minutes, you don't do it.
A lot of people have this belief that I also mentioned to you actually even earlier, that they think of themselves, I'll be happy when something XYZ happens in the future. Why do you think that's bullshit?
Because, and this is, so I think there's a layer there. So there is true that if you are hungry and starving, it's real. If if someone's shooting at you, it's probably also real. I do think as well there's a poverty line for this, where if you're just literally just obsessively desperate to even get food in your mouth, and sort of like there is a layer there. But
Yeah.
as soon as you step out of that, and there's not a single person who's listening to this, well, who knows actually now with the ways. I'm guessing most people listening to this are not being shot at. They're not worried about how they're going to eat, and like those basic pieces are being covered. So everything's about an aspirational dynamic of how you want to have your life. And I've never seen anyone end up with happiness when they say, I'll be happy when. The only times that they end up with happiness is when they go through that and realize it didn't make me happy. And instead of saying, I'll be happy when I'm on the other side, stop and reflect on what is actually going to make them happy in life. And I've seen nearly every single one of these circumstances, people start focusing more on their health, their stress, their family, the key relationships that make them happy, and they start looking for work and things they can involve themselves with that make impact. And there's two layers: one, a sense of personal growth, and two, a sense of contribution. And it's just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that, around, if you can kind of cover off survival and not dying and eating and not freezing, and you start to move up to feeling connection and all these other different places of being human, then you step up to basically personal growth, contribution, and the last one is self-actualization, which is feeling like you've ultimately achieved your purpose in a spectacular life. And I'm very keen to help empower people to march up that ladder, and it requires ownership, and it requires doing the daily inputs. And to your point on making sure you have. And I'm guilty of this, Alina. Like, I'm not perfect. I'm guilty of not having the 100% ownership all the time on some of those pieces. And for example, there's a period under very high stress, kept waking up at 2 or 3 a.m., heart racing, stressed, thinking, brain spinning. You don't have to do that for many nights in a row, and your health starts to take a serious dive. And at some point, you have to take ownership of, I either have to have the courage to have the conversations, take the action, do the thing that's going to unlock this, or change the way I'm working and approaching this so that this is no longer so crazy stressful. And I've had that happen 3 or 4 times since I launched AG, and each time I wish I'd been faster to go back and take the action to like do the thing that was going to unlock. And I've done it as recently as June this year, and I think now, like, why did I not move sooner? It's like, I'm great, I'm building forward, and I always try to think on the forward, but also try to unlock the why and the story I was telling myself so that I'm aware of it, and next time you see it, you change the story. There's that framing piece early.
How do you go about that process of um, looking what actually caused this belief in order for you not to experience or not to make a decision early that something needs to change right now?
I tend to run best off dissatisfaction, unfortunately. So I'm a pretty happy person. You have a lot of people running off and doing ayahuasca and all these other things, and they always have their spirit animal, and it's some eagle or a hawk or whatever. My spirit animal is a Labrador. If you give me humans, food, and water, there's the ocean over there. It's what I keep looking at. Sorry. If you give me humans, food, and water, I'm pretty happy. Like, really, I am. But when I start to get dissatisfied with something, what I've realized, and it starts to build a curve, and I've realized that I need to identify it early and not allow those same pieces to spool up to the point that I get massively dissatisfied, and at that stage there is huge action, right? I'm very, very capable of taking absolutely massive action, but I should act earlier. So it's the awareness more often than that now is, something here is off. I need to step in. Have I had the courageous, candid conversation? Have I? Because in my case now, I'm not a founder with a team of, 2, 3, 5, or 6. I have a larger team with many layers between me and a lot of the people. So have I had the courageous, candid conversation about what's happening, what's expected, and what needs to change? Have I stepped back and looked in the mirror and said, something here is broken, where is it me? I think most people need to get a lot better at going through some temporary suffering to build the life of their dreams. And you asked me something earlier as well, Alina, on what are some of the processes or steps that you can use to find out where are you telling yourself a story that doesn't serve you, and what are some of the areas where you look to try to sort of step back and look at yourself really hard in the mirror to think, what else could I be doing differently? And I encourage everyone to read a book called Essentialism by a guy called Greg McKeown. If you haven't read that, it's one of my favorite books. It's both about life strategy and then business strategy, because when we're talking about that one thing, you need to be focusing on the things that truly compound to winning, not just being busy. And I basically try to ban anyone from saying I'm busy. It's like, you're productive or you're not productive. And if you're not productive, how can I be supportive to help you change that? And I think that greater understanding, without sort of just going in your head and being locked in your head the whole time, because that can definitely happen as well, it has to be tied to action, is just thinking on what one thing or two things, if we were to execute them on them well for our business, would leave nearly everything else irrelevant. And that's a strategic question in your own life. What one or two things, if I just did them differently or first, or had them on non-negotiable time of the day, would most help move my life forward in that area, and then put them in there and make them happen. And there's a pretty cool book called Atomic Habits by James Clear that's another one on how do you start to bake in some of these habits so you're doing the inputs. But the commonality is awareness, a decision, ownership, and then start taking action towards the habit. I think to your point earlier on, before we kicked off the call, on people who over manifest and think too much on the vision they're going to build and everything else, and it's the people who take the steps consistently who get it done, not the dreamers. You have to have the combination of vision and action taking.
One more thing I would like to touch up on, because you also mentioned relationships being a very important part of happiness, right? Because yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think like we only can go a certain like to a certain step alone. We need people supporting us, cheering for us, and so on. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes a good relationship in personal life and in professional life?
Here's my theory on relationships. A good relationship is kind of like a good business. There may be a lot of bumps in the road, but overall, you feel more like you're pushing something downhill than uphill. That's the short version. And I think when you're in your friendships, I think a lot of us, because it's a really hard conversation to have, and you can get very easily attacked by people who are fearful of seeing you or their other friends go. And there's an honest chat on, look at this friendship that you have. I'm not saying you suddenly never talk to them ever again, but where are you choosing to invest your time? In that relationship, are you investing yourself into an environment where that person is truly supportive of what you're trying to build and sort of emblematic of where you want to go in life? And if they're on that journey with you and encouraged to be on that journey with you, then keep a reasonably high cadence. But if they're not, just completely change the cadence in the investment dynamic. And it might change from someone you hang out with every day to someone you see for a coffee every couple of weeks, or someone who, if you don't actually see them at all, but if you do bump into them, you're like, hey, how you going? Hope everything's going great, but there's no longer a continued investment. And I think that chat, to remove yourself from the relationships that do not serve you, sounds very mercurial, right? It sounds mercenary. It sounds like, ooh, that's so tough. And we're not sitting there going like, here's my list of all the things I need in my mates. It's just, you're going to know energy up or down when you invest your time with that person. Feel supported or not supported towards achieving your goals when you're with that person. Make me feel like I want to step up and do great things when I'm with that person, or make me sit there and think, you know what? A lot of what they say is important, they're never taking action towards, or there's kind of a layer of integrity there that I don't like surrounding myself with. And be a big kid. There's a lot of amazing people in the world, and I don't think we have to trap ourselves into thinking, the kids you went through high school or university with are kind of the end lot in your life. Now, the flip side of that is it is fun to maintain those long lifetime friendships, and friendships are important, but you need to surround yourself with relationships that truly, truly, truly want to see you succeed. And I think you'll find when you show that path, even with the relationships that you might have been much higher cadence with and now no cadence. Maybe it's the odd message on Instagram every blue moon, like, hey man, that looks great, congratulations, and thanks brother, hope you're doing great, and that's it. Whereas before, you were like best buds. So you can shine a lot of light on other people and help inspire them to step out of their own comfort zone without feeling like you need to do the action and you need to babysit them along the way, and definitely without overinvesting your time in those relationships that ultimately are pulling you down. And that is a conversation that is very hard to have, even with pretty old, pretty successful people. You can find you get attacked when you start trying to talk about it, but it's the reality. I don't think if I discontinued to invest myself literally in the same environment of everyone I went through high school with, that I'd be anywhere near where I am today. And that's in any sense, because I have the most incredible friends, like doing amazing things, determined to put a huge impact on the world, who are so unbelievably supportive, who want to see me succeed. In fact, they directly help me succeed, and they push me and they encourage me and they cheer me on. If I'd been locked only hanging out with the earlier group who want to complain about how their life sucks and do the same shit they've been doing for 30, 40 years, because I'm getting old now, without ever stepping out of their comfort zone, I never would have had this. So it's just that understanding that you are going to have to go through that discomfort to come out the other side as well. And the advantage, I think, now around the world is it's kind of easier to digitally find out where may there be a congregation of people who share similar aspirations and want to be that support network, and then try to map yourself to turn up there.
So for the last like 2 minutes, I still have some quick fire questions for you. So
Okay.
I just give you a quick question and you give me your first thought, okay?
Sure.
You spoke very highly of your parents, right? And the beliefs that they shared with you. So what do you think is one of them that you think everyone should know?
If you can have whatever you want in your life if you're willing to do the work. So one is belief in you, and you have to do the work. Like those two pieces together. Belief in self and work, there's that action piece equals winning.
Would you say you are the person you want to be today?
I would love to be more bold, more courageous, and physically healthier. How's that from someone who's basically business and famous for being bold, courageous, and a health company? I think I'm courageous, but I wish I was far more courageous. I think I'm bold. I wish I was far more bold. And it's one of our company values. We're sort of rebaking in our company, like to both recruit and really help people identify how they can be more courageous. And for my own health, we've had this crazy period of growth. It's been very exciting. It's been very, very long, hard days for a long period of time. And I began to kind of creak and break. Remember how I told you about you wake up and your head spinning and some of those other pieces? And I didn't move early enough. So the end result was probably the last 4, 5, 6 months, my health has been nowhere near what I would want it to be for my own expectations. And so now I'm at a point where I actually have to bring the throttle way further back to be able to really focus on that. And that's both frustrating but also a reminder, like for whatever you are on the health journey and whatever that means to you, you have to own the inputs. And I was owning the basic inputs, but you also have to own the things that are beating you up. So if you are far more stressed than you ultimately need to be, or doing far more hours than is actually healthy for you in any given time, even if you're doing the other pieces, you need to be willing to take the action to move those levers. And if you combine boldness, courage, and making sure you have health, then you typically have an audacious vision that you're acting on courageously with tons of energy.
What's something you do just for pure fun and think everybody should try?
Well, it's not a new thing. I love to literally just wake up and go fall in the sea. And I love, love, love the feeling of waking up with that little bit of light and then diving into some salt water or any water. And I feel some sort of connection with nature that I only feel in the ocean. And for those who are afraid of the water or have never learnt to swim, I just encourage people to learn this ability that will then unlock this whole new world that is being out there in the ocean and just floating around, because it's an amazing experience. And I think the modern remote live anywhere work environment allows you to have the type of experience where, hey, for this next couple of weeks, I'm working plenty, but I'm going to get up and fall in the sea every day for my breakfast.
I think that's a good thought to end this episode with you, Chris. I enjoyed our conversation really much. I feel super grateful that you did not share all these learnings just with me, but also with the community. And I think it was super valuable. And I also had, such a comfortable feeling like talking to you, and that was just such a nice experience. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you for being on here.
Oh, Lena, thank you so much. You're awesome, my friend. You have a huge, huge, spectacular life ahead of you. And I think some of your questions around health and happiness and how do you step forward out of the fear and take action, I'll just remind everyone, you have one life. We have one life. It's not a practice life. So make it your one spectacular life. And I'm really proud and inspired by seeing what you're doing towards that. And I congratulate you because it's awesome. And it's inspiring for me to see a young entrepreneur getting after it and looking to add value to people's lives. So thank you for what you're doing. I think it's great.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hugely appreciate it.
Awesome, mate. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. I truly hope that you have enjoyed it. If you did, I linked another one right here for you to check out. I hope you'll love this one as well. And I'll see you very soon in the new and next episode.